Okay, welcome everyone to the deep dive.
Hello.
Today we're really tearing into some pretty intense recent reporting. We're focusing specifically on the conflict between Iran and Israel.
Right. And the sources we've got, they're all excerpts from Al Jazeera. They're live updates, they're news reports, all dated June 14th, 2025.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive, it's pretty clear, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. We basically want to pull out the key information, the really significant statements that are reported and the impacts described just in this material.
Like a snapshot.
Exactly, a snapshot of how these specific sources were presenting things during this really critical time.
And digging into these reports, something jumps out almost immediately. It's the language being used. It's incredibly stark. These sources describe a direct exchange of strikes, yeah. And they lay out some seriously potent warnings.
Definitely. And one thing the reports seem to really highlight is that direct threat, reportedly from Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz.
Aimed right at Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, according to the reports.
Right. It's framed as this very high-stakes direct exchange. So maybe we can map out how we'll approach this.
Good idea.
Okay, so first let's look at the sequence of events as reported. How these sources actually describe the flow of the strikes.
Okay.
Then maybe pull out those specific threats, the really noteworthy statements that are highlighted in the text.
Got it.
And finally, we really need to cover the reported human cost and any broader context that these specific articles present.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, we are sticking strictly to the information inside these specific Al Jazeera sources for this discussion. No outside info, no personal takes.
Absolutely. We're just navigating the world as it's described right here in these reports.
Okay, so let's start there. How do these sources initially paint the picture? What's the situation they describe?
Well, they consistently characterize it as an ongoing conflict, specifically highlighting Iran and Israel trading missile strikes, airstrikes, that kind of thing. Yeah. They use terms like escalation, definitely. Yeah. And they describe it almost as a tit-for-tat series of attacks. That phrase comes up.
Okay, tit-for-tat exchange. And according to these reports, this exchange, it's had pretty devastating consequences.
Yeah, that's certainly how it's presented. They state quite plainly the conflict has killed dozens.
Dozens. And do they give more specific numbers?
They do. And the numbers reported in these sources are, they're quite tragic. They really demand attention. One article specifically reports at least 80 people killed in Iran.
80?
And really chillingly, it notes that figure includes 20 children.
Oh, wow. 20 children.
Yeah. The reports also state 4 people were killed on the Israeli side.
4 on the Israeli side. And casualties beyond fatalities.
Yes, they mention hundreds wounded on both sides.
Hundreds wounded. That really underscores the scale of suffering being described in these reports.
It does. It paints a picture of widespread impact.
Okay. So let's maybe pivot a bit from the reported physical exchange and that terrible human cost to the specific statements these sources chose to highlight. You mentioned earlier the report about Israel's defense minister Katz addressing Iran's supreme leader.
Right, that stands out.
What specifically did the sources say about that? How did they report that exchange?
Well, these reports either quote directly or they paraphrase Defense Minister Katz. The sources cite him stating that if Iran's supreme leader continues firing missiles at Israel, then his message is, stark.
Which is
Tehran will burn.
Tehran will burn, just like that.
That's the quote presented to the sources, yeah.
That is an incredibly potent, violent image attributed to the defense minister there. The fact that these sources give that specific quote such prominence, it suggests they see it as a really significant, maybe inflammatory statement in the whole situation, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to underscore the level of rhetoric being reported, yes. And the sources also, they connect this situation to broader geopolitical things, including a perspective they attribute to the United States.
Oh, okay. What did the reports say about U.S. involvement or their perspective on this?
Well, one of the articles references U.S. President Donald Trump.
Okay.
And the report states that President Trump was quoted, who says he was saying something like, it's not too late for Tehran to halt Israel's bombing campaign.
Okay, not too late to halt the bombing. Is there a condition mentioned?
Yes, exactly. The condition reported is by reaching a deal to halt its nuclear program.
Huh. That's a fascinating connection being reported there. So, according to this specific report, the potential stopping of Israeli bombing is explicitly linked, conditioned on Iran's nuclear program.
Precisely. That's the linkage reported.
Hmm.
And interestingly, these reports also mention Iran hitting Israel with airstrikes after what the sources describe as nuclear site attacks.
Ah, okay. So that adds another layer, another reported context or potential trigger to the sequence of events they're laying out.
Exactly. It adds context to that reported tit-for-tat dynamic.
Right. So just looking across these specific Al Jazeera sources then,
Mm.
the picture that seems to emerge is you've got this reported exchange of strikes, this back and forth. You've got the terrible human cost, those casualty numbers reported.
Mm.
You have this very severe threat reported from Israel's defense minister tied directly to Iran's reported missile fire.
Yeah, that conditionality is key in the reporting.
And then there's this statement attributed to the U.S. president linking a potential halt in Israeli bombing to a deal specifically on Iran's nuclear activities.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, when you read these reports together,
Yeah.
is how they seem to weave together the military actions with this high-level political talk and, diplomatic conditions. It's
Right.
not just this happened, then that happened. These sources present it all as, like, deeply interconnected parts of a really volatile situation.
Right. It really is a complex web they describe, even when we're just sticking strictly to the details these specific articles chose to report on and emphasize.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's maybe do a quick recap. Just revisiting the core elements we've pulled from only these specific Al Jazeera sources today.
Sounds good.
We've looked at that reported exchange of strikes, Iran and Israel, described as this deadly tit for tat.
Yeah.
We covered the stark warning the reports attribute to Israel's defense minister Katz, aimed at Ayatollah Khamenei, that reported, quote, Tehran will burn, but crucially, if Iran continues missile fire, according to the report.
Right, the conditionality reported there.
We touched on the context involving reported nuclear site attacks, and that statement attributed to the U.S. president linking a potential deal on Iran's nuclear program to possibly halting Israel's bombing campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, those deeply saddening casualty numbers reported. At least 80 killed in Iran, including those 20 children, and 4 reported killed in Israel, with hundreds wounded on both sides mentioned.
Yeah. And, connecting those dots, but only based on the source material we've looked at. What really stands out to me isn't just the cycle of retaliation that's described. It's the very specific conditions that are reported alongside the threats and potential ways out.
How so?
Well, like you said, that severe threat against Tehran, the reports explicitly link it to Iran's missile attacks continuing.
Right.
And the possibility of Israel's bombing stopping. As reported via the U.S. president's statement, it's tied specifically to a deal on the nuclear program. So the reports aren't just listing events. They seem to be highlighting these explicit triggers and conditions attached to them.
It almost makes you think about the reported rules of engagement, or maybe the potential off-ramps as they're presented just within these articles, doesn't it?
Kinda, yeah, the way the conditions are laid out.
So maybe here's a final thought for everyone listening to ponder, drawing strictly from these reports we've discussed. What do these specific reported threats and the conditions tied directly to them in the reporting, like Israel's warning that Tehran will burn only if Khamenei keeps firing missiles, or the idea reported via Trump that a nuclear deal could stop Israel's bombing, what might that suggest about the mechanics, the triggers, the potential off-ramps of this conflict as presented solely within these specific sources?
Mm-hmm.
What reported dynamics or implications emerge when you focus only on this described tit for tat and the specific conditions these particular reports attach to it all?
That's a really interesting angle. It's a powerful way to look at how these specific events are being framed and connected in this reporting.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into these sources today.
Thank you.